Hello, and welcome to Napflix. Tonight, we are going to explore 100 fascinating facts about lost civilizations. So settle in, relax, and let your mind wander as we journey through the most incredible and soothing details about lost civilizations. Let us begin with a place that quietly rewrote everything we thought we knew about our ancestors. Deep in the hills of southeastern Turkey, buried beneath a rounded hill called Göbekli Tepe, there is a temple complex that is nearly 12,000 years old. To put that in perspective, it is older than writing, older than the wheel, older than pottery, and more than 6,000 years older than the Great Pyramid of Giza. The people who built it were supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers, wandering the land in small bands, barely surviving. And yet, somehow these same people dragged massive stone pillars, some weighing more than 20 tons, into place and carved them with foxes, lions, scorpions, and strange half-human figures. Imagine a world before farming, before villages, before almost any of the conveniences we take for granted. And in the middle of that world, a cathedral rising out of the hills. There is something almost unsettling about the precision of the old pyramid stones of Egypt. Many of the granite blocks at Giza fit together so tightly that you cannot slide a single sheet of paper between them, even though each block weighs several tons. The surfaces are not just close, they are polished, measured, and laid with a patience that is difficult to imagine today. Some of those stones were quarried more than 500 miles away and floated down the Nile, then lifted into place at heights that would make any modern builder pause. The margins of error are measured in millimeters across structures the size of small mountains. When you stand at the base of the Great Pyramid and run your hand along the seam between two blocks, it feels less like stonework and more like the calm, careful closing of a drawer. Speaking of impossible weight, few sites feel as mysterious as Baalbek in modern-day Lebanon. Lying in a peaceful valley between two mountain ranges, there is a Roman temple built on top of a much older foundation, and that foundation contains some of the largest stones ever moved by human hands. 3 enormous blocks, known together as the Trilithon, each weigh roughly 800 tons. Just above them, in the quarry, lies an even larger block, the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighing nearly 1,000 tons. To give you a sense of that, no modern crane on Earth, working alone, could lift that single stone from where it rests. And yet somehow, thousands of years ago, someone shaped it, intended to move it, and simply left it there as if the task had been interrupted mid-thought. In the year 1900, sponge divers off the Greek island of Antikythera pulled up a corroded lump of bronze from an ancient shipwreck. For decades, it sat in a museum, quietly misunderstood, until the scientists finally looked inside and found a delicate system of more than 30 interlocking gears. This device, now known as the Antikythera mechanism, is more than 2,000 years old, and it is essentially an analog computer. It could predict eclipses, track the positions of the sun and moon, and follow the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympic Games. The workmanship is so fine, with teeth on the gears carved to fractions of a millimeter, that for a long time, scholars simply refused to believe it was truly ancient. Nothing remotely like it would appear again in the human record for more than 1,000 years, a reminder that knowledge, once lost, does not always return easily. And perhaps nothing speaks more powerfully of lost knowledge than the Library of Alexandria. For centuries, scrolls from across the known world were gathered in this great library in Egypt, covering mathematics, astronomy, medicine, poetry, geography, and philosophy. Scholars estimate that it once held somewhere between 40,000 and 400,000 scrolls, each hand-copied, each a small act of devotion. When the library was lost, piece by piece, to fires and neglect, the sum total of what vanished is simply incalculable. Entire branches of thought, whole libraries within the library, were quietly swept away. Somewhere in those missing texts, there were almost certainly works by authors whose names we will never know, describing a world that still had one foot in an older age. When we imagine Alexandria now, it is less a building and more a soft ache of everything that might have been. Which brings us to a story so strange, it has echoed through thousands of years of human imagination. More than 2 millennia ago, the Greek philosopher Plato described a vast island kingdom called Atlantis, a civilization of remarkable wealth and power that, in a single day and night of misfortune, disappeared beneath the sea. For most of history, people have argued whether Atlantis was pure myth, a political parable, or a distorted memory of something real. Recent discoveries in the Mediterranean near Crete and the island of Santorini have revealed traces of a truly advanced Bronze Age culture, the Minoans, whose civilization was devastated by one of the most violent volcanic eruptions in human history. Whether or not Plato meant Atlantis literally, he was writing in a world where entire civilizations had already been lost beneath ash and waves, and people still remembered. High on a dry plateau in southern Peru, the Nazca people drew lines across the desert floor that are almost impossible to see from the ground. There are hundreds of these geoglyphs, ranging from straight lines that run for miles to enormous images of hummingbirds, monkeys, spiders, and whales. From above, they look like sketches left behind by giants. What makes them so quietly astonishing is not just their size, but their accuracy. Despite having no aircraft, no balloons, and no elevated viewpoints, the Nazca managed to lay out these figures with beautiful proportion and gentle curves, as if they already knew exactly how they would look from the sky. The fact that they have survived for more than 1,500 years is due to the stillness of the desert, which rarely rains and rarely changes, preserving each line as patiently as an old memory. Back at Göbekli Tepe, there is one more mystery worth pausing on. After using the site for more than 1,000 years, its builders did something utterly unexpected. They deliberately filled the entire temple with earth, burying the great stone circles and all their carvings beneath a soft, rounded hill. Nobody knows why. Some researchers believe it was a ritual act, a way of putting the sacred to sleep. Others suspect it was an attempt to protect the site from something we will never understand. Whatever the reason, this quiet act of burial preserved Göbekli Tepe for nearly 12,000 years, protecting it from rain and weather and war, until a farmer in the 1990s noticed a strange stone poking out of the ground. Sometimes things are lost on purpose so that one day they can be found again. Among the most puzzling objects in the history of cartography is a map drawn by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis in the early 1500s. At first glance, it looks like any old map of the Atlantic, beautifully illustrated with ships and creatures in the margins. But a closer look shows something strange. The coastline at the bottom of the map appears to match the northern edge of Antarctica, a continent that would not officially be discovered for another 300 years. Piri Reis himself claimed he had copied the map from much older sources, some of them reaching back to antiquity. Whether the match with Antarctica is a strange coincidence, a quirk of old geography, or an echo of much earlier navigators, no one can say for certain. What is certain is that the map exists, drawn in steady ink, as a small invitation to wonder. In the heart of the Andes, above the modern city of Cusco, lies a fortress known as Sacsayhuaman. Its massive walls are made of stones so large and so oddly shaped that they almost do not look like stones at all. Some weigh more than 100 tons, yet they are fitted together without any mortar, curving and interlocking like puzzle pieces that were grown rather than cut. There are stones with 12 sides, stones with 15 sides, stones that bulge and twist in impossible ways, and still every joint is so tight that a blade cannot slide between them. When you walk along these walls in the cool, thin air of the high Andes, you feel the strange presence of a people who treated stone as if it were a kind of soft clay, shaping it with patience and care we can no longer quite match. Along the banks of the Indus River, around 5,000 years ago, a city called Mohenjo-Daro rose up out of the plains with a quiet elegance that still astonishes archaeologists. Its streets were laid out on a careful grid, its buildings made of uniform bricks, and its homes connected to something almost unheard of at the time: a true city-wide drainage system. Clean water flowed into the city, wastewater flowed out, and most houses had their own private bathrooms and even toilets. There were granaries, public baths and workshops, and the entire city was kept neat and orderly in a way that many modern cities still struggle to match. The people who built it left behind beautiful pottery, tiny bronze dancers, and a script that no one has yet managed to read. When that civilization faded, something remarkable was quietly lost. Off the southern coast of Japan, near a small island called Yonaguni, divers once stumbled upon something that still divides opinion to this day. Deep beneath the waves, they found enormous stone formations with straight edges, flat terraces, and what appear to be carved steps and archways. Some researchers see only natural rock, shaped by long currents and patient tides. Others see the remains of a lost city, built when sea levels were much lower, more than 10,000 years ago. Whether it was made by people or simply by the sea itself, diving down into those quiet blue depths and feeling the hard geometry under your hand is a strangely moving experience. It is a reminder that much of our past lies beneath the oceans, waiting, perhaps, to be gently rediscovered. In Mali, in Western Africa, a people called the Dogon have preserved astonishing knowledge about the night sky for as long as anyone can remember. Among their oldest stories is a detailed description of a small, incredibly dense companion star that orbits Sirius, the brightest star in our sky. Modern astronomers only confirmed the existence of Sirius B in the 20th century, with telescopes powerful enough to glimpse this tiny white dwarf. And yet the Dogon have been speaking of it for generations. Some suggest their knowledge came from contact with outside scholars in the 1900s. Others suspect a deeper, much older tradition, passed quietly from grandparent to grandchild through countless peaceful evenings under the stars. Whatever the source, their stories remind us how much patient attention the old peoples gave to the night sky and how much they seemed to see. Not far from the Bahamas, beneath the shallow turquoise waters near Bimini Island, lies a line of massive rectangular stones known simply as the Bimini Road. They stretch for hundreds of meters in a gentle curve, almost like the edge of an ancient harbor or a long, half-sunken wall. Geologists are divided about whether the stones are natural or man-made, and the truth may lie somewhere between. What is not in doubt is the beauty of the place. with soft sunlight rippling over pale sand, schools of silver fish drifting past, and the silent, patient stones lined up in a way that looks quietly deliberate. Floating above the Bimini Road feels like floating above the memory of something half-remembered, a place that may or may not have once been home to someone very much like us. Among the treasures once held in the tombs and temples of ancient Egypt is a color so striking that its recipe was lost for nearly 2,000 years. It is called Egyptian blue, and it was the first true synthetic pigment ever created, made by heating sand, copper, and limestone together in careful proportion. Its color is deep and calm, like the sky just after sunset, and it covered everything from the walls of royal tombs to small amulets worn close to the skin. After the decline of Rome, the recipe was quietly forgotten, and for centuries no one could quite reproduce that exact shade. Only recently, through careful chemistry and the patient reading of old texts, have we learned how to make it again. And we have also discovered that Egyptian blue glows softly under infrared light, a ghostly gift from the past. Another famous example of lost craftsmanship comes from the world of metalworking, where a type of steel known as Damascus steel once shaped some of the finest blades ever made. Forged in the Middle East from a raw material called wootz steel, which itself came from ancient India, Damascus blades were famous for their swirling, almost living patterns, their remarkable sharpness, and their flexibility. Stories tell of blades that could cut a floating silk scarf in half, or a strand of hair drifting on the breeze. Modern metallurgists studying old Damascus blades have found tiny structures inside them, including something very close to carbon nanotubes, which were only rediscovered in the 20th century. Nobody knows exactly how the old smiths coaxed such perfection out of simple forges, and despite many attempts, we still cannot fully reproduce it. In the dense green jungles of Costa Rica, scattered across riverbanks and fields, there are hundreds of nearly perfect stone spheres, some as small as an orange and some as large as a small car. They were carved by an ancient people sometime between 2,000 and 500 years ago, and their true purpose has been lost to time. Some may have marked borders, some may have been grouped in patterns that trace the stars, and some may simply have been works of art. What is breathtaking is how round they are. Measurements of the largest spheres show that they deviate from a perfect circle by only a tiny fraction, achieved with stone tools on stubborn granite. Standing among them in the soft, humid air, it is hard not to feel that you are walking through someone's patient and ancient dream. High in the Bolivian Andes lies a place called Puma Punku, a ruined temple complex whose scattered stones have puzzled engineers for a long time. The blocks here are not just large, they are cut into strange, angular shapes with smooth surfaces, perfectly square holes, and long grooves that look almost machined. Some of the stones interlock so precisely that they must have been designed together as a single plan, then assembled later like pieces of a puzzle. The people who built Puma Punku left no written records, and the site was already in ruin by the time later Andean peoples found it. Walking among the scattered blocks in the silence of the Altiplano, with thin clouds drifting overhead, it is difficult not to feel that you are wandering through the broken workshop of a long-vanished civilization that took its secrets with it. Inside a library in Yale University lies a small, worn book filled with strange, swirling script and illustrations of plants that no botanist can identify. It is called the Voynich manuscript, And despite more than 100 years of effort by code breakers, linguists, and artificial intelligence, no one can read a single word of it. The handwriting flows smoothly, as if the writer knew exactly what they were saying, and the drawing suggests sections on herbs, astronomy, and biology. Yet the language is unlike any known tongue. Some suggest it is a hoax, some a lost dialect, others a code so clever it has outwitted every generation. Whatever it is, each page feels like a quiet letter from a world that no longer speaks our language, waiting patiently in its glass case to be finally understood. Around 1,200 years before the Common Era, the entire Eastern Mediterranean suffered a sudden and devastating collapse. Great cities were burned, trade routes broke down, and powerful kingdoms like the Hittites vanished from the map. At the heart of this catastrophe were mysterious invaders, described in old Egyptian texts only as the Sea Peoples. We know they came in waves of ships, that they fought with skill, and that they changed the face of the ancient world forever. But who they actually were, where they came from, and what drove them from their homelands are questions historians are still working to answer. Their story is a quiet warning from the past about how fragile even the mightiest civilizations can be, and how quickly the lights of a brilliant age can dim. Roman concrete may sound like a dry topic for a late evening, but it holds a small miracle inside it. Many of the harbors and piers built by the Romans 2,000 years ago are still standing today, calmly weathering tides and storms that would quickly eat through modern concrete. Scientists who studied samples of this ancient material found that when seawater seeped into tiny cracks, it actually triggered chemical reactions that produced new, harder minerals, essentially sealing and strengthening the concrete from within. In other words, Roman concrete does not just resist the sea, it heals itself because of it. Modern engineers are slowly learning from this ancient recipe, trying to rediscover a building technique that quietly outlasted the empire that invented it. Deep beneath the soft hills of central Turkey, in a region called Cappadocia, lies an underground city called Derinkuyu that plunges 18 stories into the earth. It could shelter as many as 20,000 people along with their livestock and food stores during times of danger. Inside there are stables, chapels, kitchens, wine cellars, and even schools, all connected by narrow passages and carefully placed ventilation shafts that still work today. Great round stone doors could be rolled in place to seal off entire sections from invaders above. Walking through Derinkuyu with a soft lamp in hand, you can feel the patient ingenuity of the people who built it, carving quiet rooms out of the rock while, above them, empires rose and fell in the open sunlight. High in the waters of the North Atlantic, Viking sailors navigated with an accuracy that has long puzzled modern scholars. According to old sagas, they used a special tool called a sunstone, a crystal that could reveal the position of the sun, even when the sky was thick with clouds or mist. For a long time, this was thought to be pure legend. Then researchers discovered that certain types of calcite, a transparent crystal found in Iceland, truly can act as a sunstone by polarizing light and showing a faint, ghostly spot where the sun hides. Armed with these crystals and with their careful knowledge of wind, waves, and birds, the Vikings crossed seas that modern sailors still treat with respect. It is a soft reminder that sometimes what sounds like magic is just patience and clever use of what nature already offers. In ancient India, long before the modern age of steel, smiths forged a material called woots, which would later travel the Silk Road and become the raw ingredient for Damascus blades in the Middle East. Wootz was produced by carefully heating iron ore with wood and plant matter in sealed crucibles, creating a high-carbon steel with remarkable strength and flexibility. Traders carried ingots of Wootz across thousands of miles, and its quality was praised from the shores of the Mediterranean to the courts of Persia. The knowledge of how to make it was guarded by families and passed quietly from one generation to the next, until, over the centuries, the exact recipe simply faded away. Today, we can make similar steels with modern methods, but the original Wootz, with its particular character and shine, remains a small, soft mystery of the ancient world. Finally, as we close this first stretch of our journey, let us look up at the night sky over Giza. The three great pyramids there are aligned with startling precision to the cardinal points of the compass. Even more strikingly, many researchers have pointed out that the layout of the three pyramids from a certain angle mirrors the three stars of Orion's belt as they appeared in the ancient Egyptian sky. Whether or not this alignment was intentional, there is something deeply moving about the thought of builders carefully orienting their work to match the stars, as if the pyramids were not just tombs, but also a soft, earthly answer to the sky. In that single image, an entire world view is quietly sketched. Earth and heaven, kings and stars, all bound together by a patient, mysterious knowledge. Further south, in the highlands of central Mexico, there is a city whose very layout seems to whisper across time. Teotihuacan, built more than 1,500 years ago, was once the largest city in the Americas, with perhaps 150,000 residents going about their lives along wide, peaceful avenues. At its center rise the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon, linked by a broad road the later Aztecs would call the Avenue of the Dead. What makes this city so haunting is that no one knows who truly built it, what language they spoke, or what they called themselves. When the Aztecs arrived centuries later, the city was already in ruins, and they believed it had been made by gods. Some modern researchers point out that the precise spacing of the pyramids and temples seems to mirror, quite elegantly, the distances between the planets of our solar system, as if the entire city had been laid out as a soft map of the heavens. And still in Baalbek, there rests one of the heaviest pieces of stone ever shaped by human hands. It is known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, and it lies in the quarry where it was carved, as if the workers had simply paused to rest and never returned. It weighs somewhere around 1,000 tons, more than a modern cruise ship filled with cars, and it is fully cut, ready to be moved into place. Lying on its ancient bed of limestone, surrounded by wildflowers and dusty hillsides, it is the kind of object that makes you stop breathing for a moment when you first see it. The stone is so large it blurs the line between building material and geography. And nearby, archaeologists have since uncovered an even heavier block, hinting that the true scale of what those ancient builders planned may be beyond what we can easily imagine. Across the waters of Central America, the Mayan astronomers kept careful watch over the sky for more than 1,000 years. Without telescopes, without modern mathematics, and with only patient observation of the horizon, they predicted solar eclipses, lunar eclipses, and the movements of Venus with astonishing accuracy. Their tables of Venus, for example, tracked the planet's complex cycle over centuries, matching the true motion of the sky to within a few hours. They built entire temples aligned to capture the rising sun on special days, so that on the morning of an equinox, a shadow would slowly slide along a carved stone staircase, creating the image of a serpent descending towards the earth. It was not just knowledge, It was also theatre and prayer and memory, all fused together into stone and calendar and soft, steady attention. In the 2nd century of the Common Era, a Chinese inventor named Zhang Heng built a remarkable instrument known as the seismoscope. It was a large bronze vessel, decorated with 8 dragon heads, each holding a small bronze ball in its mouth. Beneath each dragon sat a bronze toad with its mouth open wide. When an earthquake struck, even one too distant and faint for people to feel, a delicate mechanism inside the vessel would drop the ball from one specific dragon's mouth into the toad directly below it, showing the direction of the tremor. Ancient records describe its first successful use, when it correctly indicated an earthquake hundreds of miles away that no one at court had yet felt. It is a beautiful example of how the old world blended art and science into a single, quiet object that could listen to the earth itself. In the dry lands of Persia, long before modern plumbing, engineers carved a network of underground water channels known as qanats, some reaching more than 100 kilometers long. By tapping into mountain aquifers and guiding the water gently downhill through long, cool tunnels, they brought life to cities and gardens in places where rainfall was scarce and summers were cruel. A qanat could flow for centuries without failing, cooled by earth and darkness, losing little to evaporation. Villages grew up along their paths, and in some regions, qanats still flow today, 2,000 years after they were first dug. The technology spread across the ancient world, reaching as far as North Africa, Spain, and China. Walking beside an old qanat at dusk, listening to that faint trickle beneath the surface, you can sense the patient, thoughtful genius of engineers who shaped landscapes for the comfort of those who would come long after them. On Easter Island, in the middle of the vast Pacific, nearly 900 great stone figures known as moai stand gazing inland, as if quietly guarding something we have forgotten. Some weigh more than 70 tons, and their average height is more than 4 meters. For centuries, people wondered how the ancient Rapa Nui moved them from the distant quarry where they were carved to their final platforms along the coast. Old island legends said the statues had walked. For a long time, this was treated as pure myth, until experiments in the 21st century showed that small teams of people could actually rock a large moai back and forth with carefully attached ropes, making it shuffle forward on its broad base in what really did look like a slow, rocking walk. The old stories, it turned out, had remembered something very real. Hidden deep in the jungles of Cambodia, the enormous temple complex of Angkor Wat was once the center of the Khmer Empire, one of the greatest civilizations of Southeast Asia. Its main temple is the largest religious monument in the world, and from the air, the surrounding city of Angkor stretches across a space larger than modern Paris. The builders of Angkor not only raised vast temples covered in carvings, they also constructed an elaborate system of canals and reservoirs that allowed them to store and direct water through an entire city. Many of the temples are carefully aligned with the rising sun on important days, and the towers of Angkor Wat seem to echo the shape of the sacred mountain at the center of their cosmology. When the empire declined, the jungle softly reclaimed parts of it, wrapping tree roots around stone walls in the quiet way that only time can manage. In ancient Greece, centuries before the age of electricity, there lived engineers and inventors who built clockwork figures that could pour water, open doors, and even sing. These early automatons were powered by steam, pulleys, weights, and cleverly arranged vessels of liquid. Temples sometimes held mechanical birds, statues that moved, and doors that seemed to open by themselves when a fire was lit on an altar, all driven by hidden levers and tubes. The mathematician Hero of Alexandria wrote detailed descriptions of such devices, including a small steam engine called the Iolipoli, which spun gently when heated. None of these inventions were ever scaled up into industrial machines, but they show that people thousands of years ago were already dreaming of a world where objects could move on their own, and quietly making the first small steps toward it. On the island of Crete, the Minoans built a civilization that feels strangely modern when you look at its details. In their great palace of Knossos from more than 3,000 years ago, archaeologists found rooms with running water, drainage systems, and even what appear to be flushing toilets, thousands of years before such things became common in Europe. Their pipes were made of clay, carefully tapered and joined so that water could move quickly and cleanly through the palace. The walls were decorated with bright frescoes of dolphins, flowers, and leaping bulls, suggesting a people who loved color and movement. When a catastrophic volcanic eruption on the nearby island of Santorini devastated the region, the Minoan world quietly faded, leaving behind pipes and paintings as soft clues to a civilization that had once lived unusually well. Pressed into small clay tablets along the Indus River, there is a script that has resisted every attempt at translation for more than a century. The Indus Valley civilization, which flourished between roughly 3,300 and 1,300 years before the Common Era, produced beautiful seals carved with animals and short inscriptions in these mysterious signs. Unlike ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian cuneiform, which were eventually cracked with the help of long bilingual texts, the Indus script has no such key. Most of the inscriptions are very short, often only a few symbols long, which makes the usual statistical tricks of decipherment difficult. Whether it represents a full language or a system of names and labels is still debated. For now, those tiny seals sit quietly in museums, holding a message that an entire civilization once clearly understood, and that we, for all our clever algorithms, still cannot read. In ancient Egypt and parts of Mesoamerica, skilled healers were already performing a surgery so delicate that even modern surgeons take it seriously. It is called trepanation, and it involves carefully cutting a small hole in a patient's skull to relieve pressure, often from an injury or a medical condition. What is astonishing is that many of the skulls that have been excavated from ancient burial sites show clear signs of healing around the edges of the hole, meaning the patient survived and lived on, sometimes for many years. In certain regions, survival rates from these ancient operations were surprisingly high, higher than in some hospitals during the early modern era. These small, neat openings, softly rounded by new bone growth, are a powerful reminder that ancient healers were not helpless, and that careful observation and steady hands have always been powerful medicine. On the Greek island of Crete, in the ruins of a Minoan palace, archaeologists found a small clay disc about 16 centimeters across, stamped on both sides with strange symbols arranged in a spiral pattern. This is the Phaistos disc, and despite more than a century of study, no one has yet been able to read it with certainty. It is unusual not only because of its language, but also because of its method of production. Each symbol was pressed into the soft clay with a separate stamp, which means that whoever made it essentially invented a form of movable type more than 3,000 years before Gutenberg, and then, apparently, never used it again. Or, if they did, no other examples have survived. It sits in a museum today like a lonely message in a bottle, waiting for readers who may never come. In the mountainous heart of eastern China, near a small village in Zhejiang province, there are the Longyu Caves, a network of vast chambers hand-carved into solid sandstone. The caves were rediscovered only in the 1990s, when local villagers drained what they thought were ordinary ponds and revealed enormous halls beneath the surface. Each cave is decorated with deliberate, parallel chisel marks, as if the walls had been combed by a giant. They are supported by carved pillars, and some rise more than 30 meters from floor to ceiling. Astonishingly, there are no written records of who made them, when, or why. Carbon dating suggests the caves are at least 2,000 years old, but the precise reason for their construction remains a quiet puzzle beneath the soft green hills of China. Another lost color from the ancient world is Maya blue, a brilliant turquoise pigment used in murals, ceramics, and ritual offerings by the Maya civilization. Unlike most blue pigments made from fragile plants or minerals, Maya blue is extraordinarily stable. It has survived centuries in harsh tropical climates, resisting fading, acid, and weather that would quickly destroy other dyes. Scientists studying it discovered that it is a composite formed by binding a natural indigo dye to a special type of clay called palygorskite. The Maya somehow figured out the right proportions and heating conditions to lock the dye into the clay's tiny channels, creating a pigment that could survive for 1,000 years. It is yet another example of lost chemistry, quietly rediscovered by modern science long after its original inventors were gone. In the icy north of Norway, archaeologists uncovered a Viking ship buried under a mound of earth and clay. This is the Oseberg ship, a sleek wooden longship nearly 20 meters long, carved with beautiful patterns of intertwining animals. Inside were the remains of 2 women and an incredible collection of objects, from richly woven textiles to wooden sleds and a small cart. What is astonishing is how well everything was preserved. The waterlogged, oxygen-poor clay around the burial slowed decay for more than 1,000 years, keeping the ship and many of its contents in remarkable condition. The Oseberg find is not just a glimpse of Viking craftsmanship, but a quiet reminder that entire worlds of daily life, textiles, tools, and everyday beauty can sometimes be preserved by a simple accident of soil and time. High on the Bolivian Altiplano, near the southern shore of Lake Titicaca, lies the ruined city of Tiwanaku. Once the heart of a powerful pre-Inca civilization, it was home to pyramids, platforms, and enormous stone gateways carved from single blocks of andesite. The Gateway of the Sun, perhaps the most famous piece still standing, is covered in delicate reliefs, showing a central figure surrounded by rays. The scale of the masonry here is quietly breathtaking, with some stones weighing over 100 tons, hauled from quarries far across the high plateau. By the time the Inca arrived, Tiwanaku had been in ruins for hundreds of years, its builders long gone, its stories half remembered. Today, under huge Andean skies and the slow shadow of passing clouds, the site still radiates a calm, patient dignity. In ancient China during the Zhou dynasty, doctors were already practicing a delicate form of medicine that involved placing thin needles into specific points of the body to balance the flow of what they called qi, or life energy. This is acupuncture, and it is one of the oldest continuously practiced medical systems in the world. Early practitioners mapped hundreds of points along the body, carefully connected by invisible lines they called meridians. Modern research has shown that many of these points correspond to areas rich in nerves, muscles, and connective tissue. though the ancient framework spoke more of rivers and seasons than of anatomy. Whether you view it as mysticism or as a very early form of careful, body-centered medicine, the tradition has traveled across thousands of years with quiet persistence, still helping people find calm and comfort today. High in the Peruvian desert before the Nazca ever drew their famous lines, earlier peoples built a system of underground spiral wells called puquios, designed to bring water from deep beneath the sand up to the surface. These wells are not simple holes. Each one is a carefully constructed spiral with stone-lined walls that descend in gentle steps, so workers could easily climb down for maintenance. They connect to underground channels that tap hidden aquifers, and they use the natural movement of air to keep water flowing steadily. More than 1,000 years later, many of these puquios still function, quietly watering fields and gardens in one of the driest places on Earth. They are a soft reminder that some of humanity's most thoughtful engineering was built not to impress, but simply to keep life going, year after patient year. In ancient Egypt and parts of the Near East, artisans discovered how to apply thin sheets of gold to other metals and to wood, creating stunning objects that looked entirely golden while using only a fraction of the precious metal. They had several methods, including carefully beaten gold foil pressed onto shaped surfaces, and more sophisticated techniques using natural amalgams. Some of these processes produced coatings so fine and durable that they have survived for thousands of years in tombs and temples, only dimming slightly. A skilled craftsman working patiently by lamplight could transform an ordinary wooden throne into something that looked as though it had been poured from pure sunlight. This combination of artistry and clever chemistry gave us some of the most iconic images of the ancient world, bright and quiet beneath layers of dust. In Mesopotamia, one of the earliest civilizations to invent writing, also laid the groundwork for modern mathematics. The Sumerians and the Babylonians used a place value number system based on the number 60. The same system we still use today for measuring time in hours, minutes, and seconds, and for dividing circles into 360 degrees. More than 3,000 years ago, their mathematicians were already solving problems involving quadratic equations, compound interest, and the geometry of right triangles, long before the more famous Greek mathematicians. They kept careful records on small clay tablets, pressed with a reed stylus and left to dry in the sun. When you look at one of those tablets today, covered in neat little wedge marks, you can almost feel the patient, orderly mind of a scribe working quietly in a cool temple courtyard, slowly building the foundations of a science that would last forever. In the old histories of the Byzantine Empire, there is a mysterious weapon known simply as Greek fire. It was a liquid, fired from special siphons mounted on ships and walls that could set enemy fleets ablaze even on the surface of the sea. The flames were almost impossible to extinguish with water, and the sight of burning galleys drifting helplessly across the waves terrified opponents for centuries. The exact recipe was kept as one of the state's most guarded secrets, known only to a small number of engineers and rulers. Over time, as the empire shrank and changed, the formula was lost, and despite many attempts to reconstruct it, we still do not know exactly what Greek fire was made of. It remains one of the great lost technologies of the ancient world, living on only in old chronicles and the faint echo of fire on water. In ancient Egypt, cosmetics and medicine were closely tied to each other, and both were treated with careful attention. The famous dark eye makeup known as kohl was made from crushed minerals, including lead compounds that were carefully processed to minimize harm. Modern studies suggest that the specific formulation of Egyptian coal may have helped protect the wearer's eyes from bacterial infections, something that was particularly valuable in the dusty environments along the Nile. At the same time, Egyptian physicians wrote long medical papyri describing treatments for wounds, fevers, and pain, using a mixture of herbs, honey, and patient observation. Honey, in particular, is a remarkable natural antibacterial substance, and ancient healers used it on burns and injuries with quiet success. In these small, careful blends, you can feel the calm intelligence of people who saw health and beauty as part of the same gentle care. The great civilization of the Maya left behind thousands of inscriptions carved into stone, painted on pottery, and written in a few surviving codices. For centuries, these glyphs were thought to be purely decorative or symbolic, and early European scholars dismissed them as unreadable. Then, in the 20th century, a careful new generation of linguists realized that Maya writing was actually a full phonetic and logographic system capable of recording history, poetry, and astronomy with remarkable precision. Slowly, like the sun rising over a misty jungle, the glyphs began to speak again. Now we can read the names of kings, the dates of battles, and the quiet rituals of long-vanished cities, though many inscriptions remain only partially understood. Each newly read glyph feels like a small hand waving gently from the past. Deep in the jungles of Cambodia, beyond Angkor Wat, the Khmer built an enormous network of canals, reservoirs, and channels to manage the monsoon rains. This vast hydraulic system allowed them to grow rice in such quantities that a city of nearly 1 million people could thrive in the middle of a tropical forest. They captured water in rainy months and stored it in huge reservoirs called bares, then released it carefully during dry seasons, keeping fields green and cities fed. Over time, changes in climate, siltation, and the slow wear of nature pushed this delicate balance to its limit, and the system began to fail. When the great Khmer capital was finally abandoned, one of the quiet causes was not war, but water, or rather, the loss of careful control over it. Civilizations often rise on rivers, and sometimes they fade as the rivers change. Finally, to close this next stretch of facts, let us pause on the Roman aqueducts. These long stone channels, stretching across valleys and plains on graceful arches, carried fresh water from distant mountains into cities for more than 2,000 years. Some of them, like the Aqua Virgo in Rome, still feed fountains in the modern city, including the famous Trevi Fountain. Others cross landscapes so quietly that you might miss them in the morning mist, with swallows nesting between their old stones. Their gentle slope, often less than 1 meter per kilometer, shows an extraordinary level of engineering skill, achieved with little more than wooden levels, simple surveying tools, and a great deal of patience. In those quiet, flowing lines of water, we can hear a small, steady reminder that lost civilizations are not always entirely lost. Sometimes they keep softly giving, long after their builders are gone. There is a small, gentle fact about Cleopatra that quietly rearranges our sense of time. The famous Queen of Egypt, whose story still shapes the popular image of the ancient world, actually lived closer to the moon landing than to the building of the Great Pyramid of Giza. The pyramid was already more than 2,000 years old when Cleopatra walked beside it in her royal sandals, marveling at stones that were ancient even then. From her perspective, the pyramid builders were the lost civilization, a people from a distant, almost mythical time. This simple idea reminds us that the past is not one flat layer, but a deep, quiet stack of memories, each generation looking back at the ruins of the one before and trying to imagine how their ancestors ever managed to dream so big. And it makes you wonder what people in some distant future, looking back at our own age, will think about what we quietly built and quietly lost. Long before compasses or maps as we know them, the peoples of Polynesia were already sailing across thousands of miles of open ocean with a quiet, luminous kind of navigation that seems almost impossible today. Using only the stars, the direction of ocean swells, the flight paths of certain birds, the behavior of clouds, and even the color and temperature of the water, they could find tiny islands scattered like crumbs across the vast Pacific. A good navigator could memorize dozens of star paths, along with the subtle rocking of wave patterns as they reflected off distant land. They taught this knowledge through long chants, carefully passed from one generation to the next, so that a young sailor learned not just how to steer a boat, but how to read the living surface of the sea itself. When European explorers first arrived in remote parts of the Pacific, they were shocked to find that islands 1,000 miles apart shared languages, stories, and deep family ties. All thanks to these quiet, patient wayfinders who needed no ink or paper to carry their maps. We do not know exactly how the Great Pyramid was designed, but the mathematics inside it is quietly breathtaking. The base is nearly a perfect square with sides that differ from each other by only a few centimeters across more than 200 meters. The pyramid is oriented almost exactly true north, with an error so small it would be impressive even with modern instruments. The ratio of its base perimeter to its original height is remarkably close to 2 times P, a relationship that may or may not be intentional. Inside, the great internal chambers line up with the cardinal directions, and the passages angle upward with quiet precision. Whoever planned and built this pyramid clearly had access to detailed measurements, careful planning, and a deep understanding of geometry, even if their tools look simple to us. When you sit quietly at its base in the soft light of late afternoon, you feel less like you are looking at a monument and more like you are listening to a very old, very careful mathematical thought. High in the Peruvian Andes, the Incas built walls of such beauty and precision that they still astonish visitors today. Without iron tools, without wheels, and without draft animals strong enough to move their largest stones, they fitted massive blocks together so exactly that you cannot slip a razor blade into the joints. In some places, the stones have many sides, sometimes 8, 10, or even 12, each angle matching perfectly to its neighbors. These walls have survived centuries of earthquakes that shook down far younger buildings around them. As the ground trembles, the stones shift slightly, then settle back into place, as if the entire wall were gently breathing. It is a kind of architecture that does not fight nature, but listens to it, patient and flexible and calm. Walking along a Cusco street lined with Inca masonry at dusk, with golden lamplight glowing on ancient corners, feels like walking through a quiet conversation between people and stone. In ancient Mesopotamia, kings and priests gathered scrolls and clay tablets with the same patient love that we give to our libraries today. One of the greatest of these collections belonged to Ashurbanipal, the last great king of Assyria, whose royal library in the city of Nineveh held tens of thousands of carefully catalogued tablets. These included epic poems, medical texts, astronomical observations, legal codes, and star charts. Because the tablets were made of baked clay, many of them survived the fires that later consumed the city, and we are still reading them thousands of years later. It was in this library that modern archaeologists first discovered the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest long story we know, with its themes of friendship, loss, and the search for meaning in a brief human life. Lying back on a soft pillow, it is gently moving to imagine a time when a king considered a library one of his most important possessions and quietly gathered words from every corner of his world. Back at Göbekli Tepe, archaeologists have discovered something quite unexpected among the ancient stones. Evidence that the people who built the temple may also have been among the very first to brew beer. Chemical residues found in large stone vessels suggest they were used for fermenting grain, long before anything we would call proper farming existed. Some researchers now believe that the desire to gather, celebrate, and share mild fermented drinks at sacred sites may have played a role in the eventual invention of agriculture. In this soft, slightly surprising picture, the first temples, the first bread, and the first cups of something warming and slightly dizzying all arise together as people learned that gathering in large numbers around a special place required new ways to feed and delight one another. It is a gentle thought that among the many mysteries of our deep past, the simple pleasure of sitting together with friends may have helped invent the world we live in today. In a small clay tablet from the ancient city of Ugarit, dated to around 1400 years before the Common Era, we find what is widely considered the oldest known written melody in the world. It is called the Hurrian Hymn, and it is a song dedicated to a goddess of orchards. The tablet includes words in the Hurrian language, along with musical symbols that seem to represent intervals and tuning instructions. Reconstructing the melody from such ancient notation is delicate work, and scholars disagree on exactly how the song should sound, but several gentle versions have been created and quietly performed. When you hear one of these reconstructions, soft strings plucked slowly in a minor key, it feels as though a long-forgotten voice is humming a lullaby across thousands of years. Even without understanding a word, there is something universal in the way the notes rise and fall. A human hand reaching out of the past to touch our ears in the dark. Along the coast of Japan, in places where memory of ancient tsunamis runs deep, people carved warning stones and set them at the edges of villages centuries ago. These stones carry simple, powerful inscriptions, advising future generations never to build houses below a certain point on the hillside. Some are weathered and mossy, half buried in grass, and yet their message has survived longer than any government or family name. In some villages, people who listened to these old warnings escaped disaster when modern tsunamis arrived, finding safety in the high ground their ancestors had quietly reserved for them. It is a beautiful example of how knowledge can be stored not in books or libraries, but in small acts of kindness across time. Parents leaving gifts of wisdom for children they will never meet. These old stones speak softly, but when the ocean rises, their voices are loud enough to save lives. In the caves of Lascaux, Chauvet, and Altamira, our deep ancestors left behind paintings of animals so vivid and carefully observed that many modern artists stop in their tracks when they see them. Herds of horses, bison, and deer race across the walls in layered living motion, with shading that suggests muscle and movement, and with a careful use of the rock's natural curves to create a sense of 3 dimensions. These paintings are not rough sketches. They are deliberate compositions made by people who understood light, anatomy, and the power of a single, well-placed line. The oldest of them are more than 30,000 years old, which means our ancestors were already making art worth hanging in a modern gallery long before any city, any metal tool, or any written word. It is a quiet, humbling thought that somewhere in our distant past, by firelight and pigment and patient breath, people were already making beauty with the same care we bring to it today. Across the ancient world, the precious metal tin was essential for making bronze, a mixture of copper and tin that gave the Bronze Age its name. What is fascinating is how far tin had to travel to reach many of its users. Some of the tin used in weapons and tools found in the Eastern Mediterranean may have come from as far away as Cornwall, in what is now southwestern England, carried in small ships and wagons across enormous distances. This means that long before any modern concept of global trade, people in the ancient world had already built networks of exchange that stretched across continents. Sailors and merchants knew each other across languages and cultures, and entire civilizations depended on quiet, faithful streams of material flowing across land and sea. When the Bronze Age collapsed, these trade routes broke down, and the loss was felt from Egypt to Greece to Anatolia. It is a gentle reminder that connection, once built, is more fragile than we think, and more powerful than we sometimes notice. Neath the soil of central China, buried for more than 2,000 years, lies an army of more than 8,000 life-size terracotta warriors, standing guard at the tomb of the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang. Each figure has a unique face, and they are lined up in military formation, complete with horses, chariots, and detailed armor. The craftsmanship is astonishing, but so is the hidden chamber at the center of the complex, which, according to ancient texts, contains a map of the emperor's empire with rivers of flowing mercury and a ceiling studded with gems to represent the stars. Out of respect for the burial and because of the very real danger of the mercury, the inner tomb has never been opened, and it may not be for a very long time. So somewhere beneath a quiet green mound, locked inside its careful silence, there is still a small silver sky waiting patiently for future generations to decide whether or not to disturb its rest. In ancient Egypt, physicians described cataract surgery in medical papyri long before modern ophthalmology existed. They used fine bronze instruments to push or remove the cloudy lens of the eye, a procedure known as couching. It was delicate, dangerous work, but some patients clearly benefited, regaining enough sight to move about more easily in their later years. The very idea that such a procedure was even attempted shows how observant and daring these old healers were, willing to take quiet risks in pursuit of easing a person's daily life. Accounts from other ancient cultures, including the Indian surgeon Sushruta, describe similar operations, each refined over generations. When you think of the tools they had and the softness of their patients' closed eyelids, it is difficult not to feel tenderness for the careful hands that tried to bring light back into someone's world. The Phoenicians, a seafaring people based in ancient Lebanon, did not build pyramids or vast monuments. Instead, they left behind something even more powerful in its own quiet way: the alphabet. Before their time, most writing systems used hundreds or even thousands of symbols, each representing a word or a syllable. The Phoenicians developed a compact set of about 22 simple letters, each standing for a consonant sound. This small, elegant system was easy to learn, easy to write, and easy to adapt to other languages. Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Arabic, and many modern scripts all trace their roots back to this quiet invention. In a real sense, every book on your shelf, every sign on the street, and every soft message on a screen is made from letters that flowed outward from a small, coastal people who once loaded their ships with purple dye, cedar wood, and a simple, portable way to carry thought itself. Back at Göbekli Tepe one more time, the T-shaped stone pillars that mark the center of each ring are carved with the quiet beauty of a very observant people. Some pillars show lions stalking, foxes trotting, vultures taking flight, and snakes curving around the stone. Others display abstract symbols, spirals, and strange bucrania, which are stylized shapes of cattle skulls. There are even images that look like arms and hands, suggesting that the pillars themselves may represent stylized figures standing tall in the sanctuary. The artistry is precise and patient, with lines that would not look out of place in a modern illustration. When you trace them with your eyes in the soft light of a photograph, it feels as though someone very much like you, many thousands of years ago, carefully stood where you are standing, took a gentle breath, and began to carve. Something very human passes between you and those old hands. In the ancient Hawaiian Islands, centuries before the arrival of Europeans, local communities built vast fish ponds along the coast, carefully designed to raise and capture fish in an almost agricultural way. Walls of stone were built just offshore, with small wooden gates that allowed young fish to swim in with the tide, but kept larger, fattened fish from leaving. Over time, the ponds would hold thriving populations of mullet and other species, providing a steady, reliable source of food without damaging the wider reef. Some of these fish ponds were enormous, with miles of stone walls shaped by generations of patient workers. The system was sustainable, gentle, and deeply tuned to the rhythm of tides and seasons. It is a beautiful example of how a lost or nearly lost civilization can remind us that older ways of feeding ourselves were sometimes quieter, wiser, and kinder to the sea than many of the methods we use today. At Stonehenge on the open plains of southern England, there is a softer mystery hidden inside the more famous circle of large sandstone blocks. Among the giant outer stones, there is an inner ring of smaller, darker stones called bluestones, each weighing a few tons. Modern geological studies have traced these bluestones back to quarries in Western Wales, more than 200 kilometers away. Somehow, ancient builders moved them across rivers, hills, and valleys, possibly using wooden sleds, rollers, and rafts on the sea. Why they chose this particular stone rather than any of the closer options, we do not know. Perhaps the bluestones came from a place that was already sacred or had special properties that mattered to their beliefs. Whatever the reason, this quiet act of carrying stones across half a country, simply because a particular stone was spiritually right, speaks of priorities very different from the ones we usually use when we build. Among the oldest surviving maps in the world is a small clay tablet from ancient Mesopotamia, dating to around 700 years before the Common Era. It shows the world as a flat disk, surrounded by a salty ocean, with Babylon in the center, the Euphrates River running through it, and distant lands marked around the edges. The map is not accurate by modern standards, but it is a beautiful snapshot of how our ancestors imagined their place in the universe. Other early maps come from Egypt, China, and Greece, each reflecting a particular culture's hopes and fears about the edges of the known world. Looking at these old maps in soft museum light, you can almost feel the gentle anxiety and excitement of mapmakers trying to describe a world they could not see all at once, working patiently from travelers' tales and quiet observation. Each map is a small act of wonder held in clay and ink. In ancient India, surgeons describe procedures that we would today call rhinoplasty, or plastic surgery of the nose. A physician known as Sushruta, often called the father of surgery, wrote a detailed text called the Sushruta Samhita more than 2,000 years ago. In it, he described how to take a piece of skin from the forehead, carefully shape it, and graft it onto a damaged nose. This was especially important in a society where disfigurement from injury or punishment could be socially devastating. His descriptions of instruments, anesthetics, and careful follow-up care are remarkably sophisticated, and the basic idea of flap-based nose reconstruction is still used in modern plastic surgery. When later European doctors encountered Indian surgeons performing such procedures in the 1700s, they were astonished. It is another quiet example of a medical tradition that reached into the future from a much earlier time than most of us realize. The Maya calendar was not a single calendar, but a soft weaving together of several cycles at once. There was a sacred round of 260 days, a solar year of 365 days, and a long count that stretched across thousands of years, used to mark great historical dates. By combining these cycles, the Maya could give every day a unique identity that would not repeat for more than 50 years. Their mathematicians tracked the movements of Venus, Mars, and Jupiter with astonishing accuracy. They also predicted eclipses and precisely noted the moments when the sun would appear to pause at the edges of its annual journey. When you realize that all of this was done without clocks, without telescopes, and without paper as we know it, you begin to sense how carefully the Maya sky watchers observed the world and how much patience their quiet science required. Along the banks of the Euphrates more than 5,000 years ago, the people of the city of Uruk began scratching marks into small clay tablets, using them to keep track of grain, sheep, and trade. Over time, these marks grew from simple pictures into a true writing system, the first in the world. It is called cuneiform, named after the wedge-shaped marks pressed into wet clay with a reed stylus. The ability to record thoughts outside the human head, to send messages across distance and time, is one of the most quietly revolutionary inventions in our history. It made long contracts, great poems, and detailed scientific observations possible, and it gave later civilizations the tools they needed to remember themselves. Everything that came afterward, from sacred scriptures to scientific papers to small handwritten letters between friends, is built on the gentle shoulders of those first pressed wedges. In the museums of Europe, you can find small bronze objects called Roman dodecahedra, each one a 12-sided hollow figure with round holes in each face and little knobs at each corner. More than 100 of these mysterious objects have been found across the former Roman Empire, from Britain to the Balkans, yet no ancient Roman text mentions them at all. Their purpose remains a real mystery. Some scholars think they were used as surveying tools, others as knitting aids for making glove fingers, and still others as religious or ritual objects. There are even people who argue they were simply beautiful puzzles, made to delight and occupy the hands of their owners. Whatever they were for, they are a gentle reminder that even a well-documented civilization like Rome could quietly leave behind objects whose meaning slipped away, proving that sometimes what we lose is not grand cities, but small, intimate things. Among the oldest records of kings in the world is the Sumerian king list, a clay document that names a long line of rulers stretching back into what sounds like pure mythology. Some of the earliest kings in the list are said to have reigned for tens of thousands of years each, which obviously cannot be literally true. Scholars believe these huge numbers represent symbolic or ritual traditions, perhaps honoring a mythical golden age before the Great Flood that, according to the same records, swept across the land. After the flood, rain lengths become much shorter and more realistic. What is fascinating is that even in a deeply poetic and symbolic document, there is still a quiet sense of history, of a people trying to connect themselves to a very distant past through careful lists of names. When you read those old names slowly in the soft light of a reading lamp, you can hear them echoing like footsteps down a long, softly lit hallway. In ancient Greece, time was measured not with clockwork gears, but with the gentle fall of water. The clepsydra, or water clock, was a simple yet elegant device in which water dripped slowly from one vessel into another, marking time by the changing level of the liquid. In courts, speakers were given a fixed amount of water in which to make their case, so that no one could speak longer than their allotted share. More advanced versions use floats, gears, and even small moving figures to indicate the hours. As the water clock traveled eastward and westward, it inspired further inventions, including delicate automated clocks in medieval Islamic cities and China. Lying quietly in your bed at night, it is soothing to think of that soft, steady sound of water becoming time, as generations of philosophers, poets, and everyday people arrange their days around the patient fall of a few drops. In the Andes, the Inca kept records of crops, taxes, history, and stories without any alphabet at all. They used a beautiful system of knotted strings called quipus, in which different colors, types of knots, and positions on the cord encoded information. A skilled quipu maker could store numerical data, such as harvest totals or population counts, with great accuracy. Some researchers now believe that quipus could also carry more complex narrative information, effectively turning a bundle of colored cords into a soft, tactile library. After the Spanish arrived and many traditional practices were forcibly abandoned, the ability to read quipus was largely lost, though small communities in remote mountain villages still preserve fragments of the art today. Imagine running your fingers gently along a knotted string and feeling entire generations of memory pressed into its twists and colors. That was once, for the Inca, a kind of quiet reading. Finally, as we come to the end of this third long stretch of facts, let us pause on the ancient concrete used at the Palace of Knossos on Crete. Builders there were already using a simple form of lime-based mortar and rudimentary concrete mixes thousands of years ago. While it was not as advanced as Roman concrete, it was enough to hold together elegant walls, stairways, and chambers that still delight visitors today. This quiet use of early concrete is part of a broader pattern we see again and again. Ingredients, techniques, and ideas appearing long before they are fully developed, used quietly in small corners of the ancient world. Sometimes these techniques blossom later into great systems that shape history, and sometimes they simply fade with the civilizations that invented them. Either way, they are a soft reminder that knowledge is not a straight line, but a slow, unfolding conversation between many generations, with plenty of room for pauses, detours, and quiet, patient returns. In Egypt, not far from the pyramids of Giza, the Great Sphinx gazes quietly across the desert, its patient stone face weathered by thousands of years of wind and sun. What is less widely known is that the Sphinx shows unusual patterns of erosion, particularly on the rock surrounding its enormous body. Some geologists have suggested that these patterns look more like the result of heavy rainfall than of dry desert wind, which would imply that the Sphinx was carved at a time when the region was much wetter, possibly thousands of years earlier than the official date. This theory remains controversial, and many Egyptologists disagree with it, but the very possibility is gently fascinating. It would mean that the Sphinx watched over a green, rainy land long before Egypt, as we know it, existed, and that whoever carved it lived in a world still soft with lakes and grasses where, today, only the desert remains. Whether the theory is correct or not, standing before that ancient face at sunset, you can almost feel layers of forgotten weather pressing quietly into the stone. In ancient Egypt, perfume makers worked with the same careful attention that modern chemists bring to their laboratories. They gathered resins, myrrh, frankincense, lotus flowers, and rare herbs from across the ancient world, and they blended them slowly in cool stone rooms to create fragrances that could last for years. Some recipes were written down in temples and on papyri, while others were passed quietly between master and apprentice. Traces of these perfumes have been found in ancient jars, and modern scientists have even reconstructed some of them, revealing surprisingly complex and beautiful scents. Walking into a darkened temple thousands of years ago, one might have been greeted by soft trails of burning incense, cool air from thick stone walls, and the gentle presence of these carefully blended fragrances, mixing with prayer and candlelight. There is a quiet, sleepy magic in the idea that a scent, carefully crafted by a patient ancient hand, might, in some small way, still linger in a jar in a museum, waiting to be softly breathed in again. Across the plateaus of the American Southwest, the Hopi people have lived in small, quiet villages for longer than most written histories can remember. In their sacred kivas, round or square underground chambers, they gather for ceremonies that honor the earth, the rain, and the long cycles of the seasons. Their rituals include beautiful songs, gentle dances, and the careful tending of sacred objects. Each kiva has a small hole in the floor called the sipapu, which represents the place where their ancestors first emerged into this world. Unlike many ancient traditions, the Hopi ceremonies are still alive today, practiced by modern people who carry a living memory of a very old understanding of the land. In a world that often rushes, there is something deeply calming in knowing that somewhere in the quiet heart of the desert, families are still singing songs their ancestors sang 1,000 years ago, their soft voices rising into the dry evening air. There is a particular quality to the stillness of ancient ruins at twilight that is difficult to put into words. Whether it is the tumbled columns of a Greek temple, the sandstone walls of Petra, or the tall stone pillars of Palmyra, something gentle happens when the day slips into dusk and the stones begin to cool. The last long light of the sun turns the old surfaces a soft gold, and the birds that nest in the crevices begin to settle. Lizards slip into the cracks, and the wind that has been busy all day grows quiet, as if the whole place is slowly exhaling. If you sit quietly on a fallen stone at such an hour, you can almost feel the ruins breathing with you, sharing the quiet relief of another day finished. It is at moments like this that the idea of a lost civilization stops feeling abstract and becomes something softly intimate, as though the stones themselves were old friends who have simply agreed not to speak. In the tombs of ancient Egypt and in other archaeological sites around the world, archaeologists have found pots of honey that are thousands of years old, still perfectly edible. Honey is one of nature's most remarkable natural preservatives, thanks to its low water content, its acidic nature, and the gentle antibacterial compounds produced by bees. Sealed in a jar and kept away from moisture, honey can essentially last forever. There are stories of explorers tasting ancient Egyptian honey and finding it still sweet, still golden, still carrying a faint hint of the flowers that blossomed in a world long gone. In this simple fact, there is something very comforting. It means that a gentle gift from a meadow thousands of years ago can, in principle, still be quietly enjoyed today. A small, delicious bridge of sweetness between our time and theirs. In the darkness of ancient storehouses and burial sites, some of the seeds that our ancestors set aside have quietly survived for thousands of years. Researchers have successfully germinated seeds from ancient dates, wheat, and other plants found in dry, well-preserved contexts, including one famous case involving a 2,000-year-old date palm seed from the ruins of Masada. When given the right conditions, these seeds slowly woke up from their long sleep, sending out small green shoots. The idea that a seed can wait, patient and alive, for so many centuries is quietly miraculous. It is also a living connection to varieties of crops that no longer exist in the wild or on farms, carrying genetic information that might help future agriculture adapt to a changing climate. Somewhere in an old jar of grains, perhaps not yet found, there may still be the memory of a civilization that farmed its fields by hand and planted with hope. Long ago, before modern nations and modern borders, the mountains of Lebanon were covered in vast forests of cedar trees, so tall and strong that their wood was sought after by kings from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Phoenicia. The cedars were used to build temples, palaces, and the great trading ships that carried goods across the Mediterranean. Their scent was considered sacred, and their beauty inspired poems and hymns. Over thousands of years, so much cedar wood was cut that only small pockets of the original forest remain today, carefully protected in quiet nature reserves. Walking through one of these surviving groves, where the old trees stand like tall, patient witnesses, you can smell the same fragrance that drifted through the halls of ancient kings. It is a gentle, fragrant memory of a civilization that once rose on the strength of a single tree species, and a quiet reminder to care for the forests we still have. Across the Middle East and Central Asia, and across other parts of the ancient world, great trade routes once linked distant cities in slow, patient webs of commerce and storytelling. The Silk Road is perhaps the most famous of these, a long series of caravan paths that stretched from China through the deserts and mountains to the Mediterranean. Along the way, travelers carried silk, spices, precious stones, and endless ideas, including religions, languages, and scientific knowledge. Walking beside an ancient trade road today, you can still sometimes see the worn stones where countless hooves and feet passed by, and the ruined caravanserais where travelers slept under open skies. These long, quiet routes were the quiet arteries of the lost civilizations, keeping them alive through steady, unhurried exchange. There is something soothing about imagining a small lamp burning in a desert inn at night, where travelers from different lands shared food and stories before continuing their long, gentle journeys. In the southern part of Iraq, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, there was once a vast landscape of marshes, home to a people sometimes called the Marsh Arabs or the Madan. They built their houses and even their community meeting halls, called mudhifs, entirely from bundles of reeds, curving them into elegant arched structures that looked like soft cathedrals rising from the water. Their lifestyle traced back thousands of years, connecting them to the ancient Sumerians who once lived in the same wetlands. The marshes were drained for political reasons in the 20th century, and the people were forced to leave, nearly erasing one of the oldest continuous ways of life on Earth. More recently, conservationists have begun restoring the marshes, and some families have returned. As water gently flows back into the old channels, and as birds and fish quietly reappear, a very old civilization is softly remembering how to come home. Long before modern astronomy, people in many cultures gave names and stories to the patterns of stars in the night sky. They imagined great hunters, patient bears, flying horses, and sleeping goddesses drawn in soft lines across the dome of heaven. These constellations were not just pretty stories. They helped travelers find their way, marked the seasons for farmers, and kept ancient histories alive through generations of children, learning to recognize familiar shapes in the dark. Many of the star names we still use today come from ancient Arabic, Greek, and older sources, quietly carried forward across thousands of years. When you lie on a soft blanket in the grass at night and look up at the same stars our ancestors watched, you are participating in one of the oldest and most peaceful human traditions, simply looking up, imagining and allowing the slow motion of the sky to quiet the mind before sleep. Among the most beautiful of all ancient structures are the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, enormous stepped temples that rose in layered tiers toward the sky. Their gentle curves and carefully sloped sides were meant to connect earth and heaven, providing a high place where priests could meet with the gods of their city. Each layer was smaller than the one below, giving the whole structure a soft, mountainous shape, even on the flat plains of the region. The Great Ziggurat of Ur, partially reconstructed today, is one of the most famous examples. Climbing slowly up its ancient steps in the late afternoon, you can almost feel the patient rhythm of the old ceremonies, with long lines of worshippers moving steadily upward beneath a warm, golden sky. These peaceful giants remind us that long before skyscrapers, human beings were already reaching quietly into the heavens, one careful layer of brick at a time. In ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, and in parts of the Greek and Roman world, there existed places known as dream temples, where people would go to sleep hoping to receive guidance, healing, or insight from the gods. Priests would prepare the temple with incense, gentle music, and calming rituals. Visitors would lie down on soft pallets inside quiet inner chambers and allow themselves to drift off, trusting that whatever they dreamed would carry meaning. In the morning, dreams were carefully discussed and interpreted, sometimes with the help of written dream books that catalogued symbols and their possible meanings. Whether or not we believe that dreams always carry hidden messages, there is something quietly lovely in the idea of entire sacred spaces devoted to the act of sleeping. They are a soft reminder that our ancestors already understood that rest is not empty time, but a deep, essential part of being alive. On the Gangetic plains of northern India, there once stood a great center of learning called Nalanda, considered one of the first true universities in the world. Founded more than 1,500 years ago, it welcomed students and teachers from across Asia, including China, Korea, Tibet, and Central Asia. Its library was said to contain hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, stored in several great buildings called Dharmaganja, or the Mountain of Truth. Scholars studied philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, grammar, and spiritual traditions, all under the soft roofs of its many halls. When Nalanda was eventually destroyed, the fires that consumed its library were said to burn for many days, sending quiet curls of smoke up into the sky. The loss of that library is one of the great quiet tragedies of human history, and yet the memory of Nalanda remains, inspiring modern attempts to rebuild it and honor the gentle idea that shared learning is one of our most precious inheritances. In the jungles of Cambodia, soft moss has grown slowly over the stones of Angkor for many centuries, giving the ancient temples a deep, quiet green that feels almost alive. The walls of carvings, once sharp and clear, are now softened by small ferns, lichens, and the careful crawl of old tree roots. In some places, the giant strangler figs have wrapped themselves around walls and gateways, their roots pouring down like slow, woody waterfalls, pressing into the carvings as if reading them by touch. Conservation experts must carefully balance the need to protect the temples with the beauty of these living embraces between stone and tree. Walking along the long stone corridors of Angkor Thom at dawn, with the soft chirping of hidden birds and the sunlight glowing gently on moss-covered gods, you can feel how time is not always an enemy of ancient things. Sometimes it dresses them gently in living silk. In many ancient civilizations, the rhythm of the year was marked by harvest festivals, when whole communities gathered to celebrate the bringing in of crops. In ancient Egypt, the festival of Opet honored the flooding of the Nile and the gift of fertile soil. In Mesopotamia, New Year ceremonies marked the return of spring and the renewal of life. In ancient China, festivals like the Mid-Autumn celebration gathered families under the light of a round, bright moon to eat small cakes and tell stories. These celebrations were not just religious duties, but soft social glue, binding people together in shared relief and gratitude. Long after the civilizations that invented them have faded, many of these festivals live on in one form or another, quietly reminding us that harvest, family, and gentle feasting have always been among our most universal joys. There is a quiet rhythm to the building of pyramids that we rarely think about. Unlike the dramatic images of armies of slaves cracking whips in Hollywood movies, modern evidence suggests that the great Egyptian pyramids were built mostly by skilled workers and seasonal laborers who lived in nearby villages, were well fed, and worked in organized teams. They gave themselves playful team names like the Friends of Khufu Gang or the Drunkards of Menkaure. They shared meals of bread, fish, and beer, and they honored their dead with simple tombs near the great monuments they had helped raise. When you imagine the building of a pyramid in this softer light, you no longer see a cruel nightmare, but something more like a long, collective, patient craft, carried out year after year by people who took quiet pride in their work. The stones may be grand, but the hands that placed them belong to very ordinary, very human lives. In nearly every ancient civilization, parents sang lullabies to their children at night, gentle songs meant to soothe them into sleep. Many of these lullabies are lost forever, spoken in languages we no longer understand, and carried away by the quiet fading of voices over the centuries. A few have survived in texts or in folk memory, and their simplicity is moving. They often talk about stars, moons, small animals, soft rivers, and the promise that morning will return. In some old Mesopotamian clay tablets, there are even lullabies that ask the child to please stop crying, because the noise is disturbing the household gods, which is a gently funny detail that feels very human. When you think about these soft songs being sung in the darkness of small rooms thousands of years ago, in worlds with oil lamps and thick clay walls, it is easy to feel a deep connection to the quiet parents of the ancient world, who wanted exactly what modern parents want: a peaceful, softly sleeping child at the end of a long day. In the quiet depths of ancient tombs, far from sunlight and the noise of the world above, there is a particular silence that feels unlike any other. The walls, often carefully decorated with scenes of daily life, gods, and the journey of the soul, seem to hold the breath of the people who once stood there in solemn ceremony. Many ancient cultures believed strongly in the idea of an afterlife and prepared their dead carefully with beloved objects, food, and favorite tools. Archaeologists sometimes describe the feeling of stepping into an undisturbed tomb as one of the strangest and most reverent experiences of their lives, as though entering a place where time has been carefully folded and set aside. There is no reason to be afraid of these quiet spaces. They are, in their own way, small rooms of remembrance, built by people who simply could not bear the idea that the ones they loved would ever be entirely forgotten. In ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, and many other parts of the Old World, people baked bread that was very similar to what we still enjoy today. They ground grain with patient stone mills, mixed it with water, and baked it in clay ovens. Some loaves included special ingredients like honey, seeds, or dried fruits for festive occasions. Archaeologists have even found charred bread rolls at sites like Pompeii, frozen in time by volcanic ash. When experimental archaeologists try to recreate these ancient recipes, the results are often surprisingly good, filling modern kitchens with warm, comforting smells that would have been familiar to our ancestors. There is something beautiful in the thought that a simple loaf of bread can travel across thousands of years in more or less the same shape, connecting all of us in the shared warmth of something baked with care. In that soft steam rising from a fresh loaf, even the most ancient civilizations are still quietly present. On clear nights in many ancient cities, reflective pools, canals, and carefully placed basins of water would catch the light of the stars and the moon, turning them into silent mirrors of heaven. In the temples of Egypt, the Mayan ceremonial pools of Central America, and the carefully arranged reservoirs of Angkor, water was often used not only for drinking and washing, but for spiritual reflection, both literal and figurative. Priests and rulers would gaze into these dark, quiet surfaces, seeing themselves and the sky at the same time. There is something quietly calming about imagining such places as they were, with the gentle sound of water lapping softly against carved stone, the night air cool on the skin, and distant stars twinkling in the still water, as though the universe had come down for a while to rest beside the people who loved it. In the storerooms of many museums, there are simple clay pots and bowls whose surfaces still show the soft fingerprints of the artisans who made them. When a potter smooths wet clay with their hands, tiny impressions remain, and when the pot is fired, those impressions become permanent. Thousands of years later, scientists can study these prints and learn small, beautiful things, such as the approximate age and sometimes even the sex of the person who shaped the vessel. Some of these ancient hands belong to women and girls, some to men and boys, some to people we can only imagine. Touching a museum display case that holds such a pot, it is possible to feel an almost physical sense of closeness to the hands that made it. In that tiny print, a lost civilization is gently saying, "I was here. I worked this clay carefully, and I hoped it would last." In the deserts of Arabia, on the windswept hillsides of Greece, and in the abandoned cities of Central Asia, the wind often moves through empty temples with a sound that is both hollow and tender. It hums softly through broken doorways, whistles around fallen columns, and brushes against weathered carvings with the patience of a very old musician. In places like Palmyra, Persepolis, and the ruins of Hatra, this wind has been the main visitor for many centuries, keeping the stones company long after the people are gone. If you close your eyes and listen to recordings of such places, you can sometimes almost hear distant voices inside the sound of the wind, as though conversations from thousands of years ago had become a gentle, unresolved music that the air keeps playing to itself. It is a quiet reminder that even in emptiness, there is presence. In every ancient culture, stories were told to teach, to entertain, and to help people fall asleep at the end of a long day. Mesopotamian scribes recorded epic tales of heroes and gods. Egyptian storytellers spun quiet myths about the gods of the river and the sky. Indian sages wove together long cycles of stories about learning and love. Ancient Greek grandmothers shared their own small versions of tales that would later become world-famous myths. Alongside these great stories, there were countless smaller ones, simple riddles, gentle jokes, and soft bedtime tales that we will never know in detail because they were told aloud and allowed to fade with the voices that told them. And yet, in a very real sense, every story we tell each other today is a soft descendant of those first quiet evenings by the fire. Whenever you share a story with someone you love, you are continuing a tradition as old as civilization itself. In many old places around the world, the stones of ancient paths and temple floors show subtle, worn depressions where countless feet have walked over many centuries. At sacred sites, where pilgrims have come again and again for generations, you can sometimes see a softly rounded hollow in the step where the most common foot placement has quietly shaped the rock itself. It is a slow, gentle kind of sculpture, made not by chisels, but by quiet devotion and patient repetition. Each footprint is small, but together, over enough time, they can carve stone. When you place your own foot into such a hollow, as travelers sometimes do, you feel a deep sense of connection with all the people who stood there before you, each with their own hopes, worries, and reasons for coming. It is a soft, physical way of saying that we are all passing through the same quiet places, leaving the tiniest marks behind us as we go. And so, after 100 small stories about lost civilizations, we come to the last, gentle question. What did they really know? How many of their secrets are quietly waiting for us beneath sand, sea, and soil? And how many have simply become part of the soil itself, broken down into dust and memory? Perhaps the deepest lesson of the ancient world is that knowledge, like stone, is both more durable and more fragile than we think. It can last for thousands of years in the form of a clay tablet or a carefully cut pillar, and it can also slip away in a single afternoon of fire and forgetting. Our ancestors were not primitive. They were observant, patient, and often astonishingly clever, building with the tools and ideas of their age. And in a very real way, we are their inheritors, continuing their quiet work each time we pay careful attention to the world and try, gently, to understand it. And that is where we will leave it tonight. 100 facts about lost civilizations, each one a quiet reminder of how extraordinary our world truly is. Thank you for spending this time with us here on Napflix. If you enjoyed tonight's journey, consider subscribing so you never miss a new video. Until next time, sleep well, dream deeply, and we will see you again very soon. Good night.